Great, thanks, Dave, good morning. Before I start, I read the paper this morning and noticed that the federal government has announced they're shutting down 139 data centers, over some 2,000 some odd data centers. This is a subject passion to me. We preach this to all of our customers around the world because it makes them more efficient, which as taxpayers we should be having, but it almost always saves energy. So there's still a big opportunity around this globe for people to consolidate, and there's a variety of techniques, compression, virtualization, lots of stuff that we and others are working on. So you should all feel good that, one, this will save us a bit of money, but it also helps chunk away at the energy efficiency issue. So let me start by saying that what everybody knows in here, and that is that technical and economic advancement over many, many decades has continued to improve standards of living around the world, certainly here in the U.S., but in more recent years we've seen a lot of advancement in China, India, and hundreds of millions of people now moving to cities, living a different life. The problem, or at least one of the problems as a result of all this goodness, is that we have a growing concern about sustainability. And, fortunately, I would say that technology, which created a lot of this, or most of this, improving standard of living and globalization, will actually help very much solve this problem, and particularly around the issue of energy. So the energy part of sustainability, I'm quite confident, will really take the lead in ultimately solving this problem. And you're hearing in this conference yesterday a number of things that I think start to give you a sense of how that's going to happen. I've learned quite a bit in the last couple of years since we started the Institute, and so I've gotten more involved. I obviously meet with a lot of customers in the oil and gas industry. I've done that for a long time, but I'm also learning more about alternatives and certainly what the research we're doing here in other places. And I've come to the conclusion that there's a few big problems in life that get a lot of press. One is the massive government deficit problem here in Europe, and this is a very difficult problem. There is the health care, which is part of the problem, but it's even in its own right, there's other deficit issues, but certainly health care is an enormous one, and I think that here technology is making the problem worse in the sense that it's good that we have better pills and better procedures and everybody's living longer, but the fact of the matter is that we still haven't come up with a way to pay for it. So this is a case where technology isn't necessarily helping. I mean, you can argue it can and will help some degree of efficiency. But in the case of energy, I think it's very much akin to my industry, the IT industry. I think technology clearly, as you saw yesterday, will continuously reduce the cost of solar panels, will reduce the cost of LED lights. So there's a lot of technical innovation, and so at the end of the day, what's going to solve this problem of energy is technology, going down learning curves, a lot of hard science. And so I think that hopefully you'll come away, if you didn't think that already, starting to really understand that it really is a solvable problem. Some of these other ones, not so sure. The other one that's a very difficult problem to solve is something as simple as academic achievement in the United States in K to 12. 50% of all Black and Hispanic kids aren't even graduating from high school. I think that's a big problem. I'm not sure any of us know how to solve that, but I can guarantee you we will solve over a number of decades the energy problem. I really believe that. So my 45-year career has been mostly up in Silicon Valley, and I've seen it firsthand, what's happened with semiconductors and disk drives and computers and software, and you've all seen that if you aren't in the industry in terms of your companies or your uses of iPhones and all the evolution of PCs and all that kind of stuff. And so that power of Moore's Law and these learning curves is still alive and well. And some of the stuff we talked about yesterday applies to computers, and that is going to continue. The things that John Bowers and others are doing are going to continue to enhance and make Moore's Law continue, if you will. There's been a lot of technical advancement in what I call traditional energy, oil and gas, nuclear, coal, and those businesses, oil and gas in particular, have been around a long time. And some of you may not realize the huge amount of technical investment that goes on in that industry. Huge amounts of petroleum engineers, very, very smart people, and they have worked to find, more reserves, and the latest one being this enormous gas reserve that they're able to now go out and attack And there's some environmental issues which are going to have to get sorted out, but it would appear that we have enormous gas reserves that are going to be able to be produced at very low cost over time. But if you look at alternative energy or energy efficiency, it's still on the what I would call the newer side. People have been working on this for a while, but relative to the long traditions in some other industries like oil and gas, it's still newer. And the the breakthroughs really haven't come to the same degree. The breakthroughs that have come in the IT industry have been arguably more dramatic. But then again, we've been around probably longer than some of this stuff's going on. Again, I go back. I first went to Silicon Valley 40 years ago, so it didn't happen overnight. So I actually think that what you will see is with the increased focus and understanding now of what needs to be done, and with the application of hard science and engineering, you're going to see phenomenal breakthroughs. And you saw some of that yesterday. I mean, you saw what's coming. I think LED lighting is for sure going to replace every bit of lighting. It's just a question: is it 15 years? Is it 20 years? Batteries, I think you're going to see tremendous. There hasn't been a lot of evolution in batteries, but I think there's opportunities to see dramatically better battery power, cleaner disposal, lots of other things. So there's a lot of things going on now that there's a bigger and bigger focus. And so traditional research universities like UC Santa Barbara play a big role in helping us, and as do the federal labs, as you saw, who partner with the universities. And I think that the research that's done is really important, because a lot of companies like mine don't really do that really early stage research. They rely on ideas to sort of be, come along, and then they can figure out how to commercialize them. But the other huge thing that we're doing, and certainly we're doing here at UCSB, is we provide talent. So just like we've provided huge amounts of petroleum engineers as a nation for years, just like we've provided huge amounts of computer science graduates at Google and Oracle and lots of other, Microsoft, lots of other places, we need to grow a bigger and better pool of talent to help solve this problem. So universities play a very unique role there. And the one thing that I know from my industry experience in the IT industry, I would say would apply here. What we need to do is make sure we have enough money and funding, but we need to open the doors. The U.S. immigration quotas are absolutely insane. We should have unlimited ability to bring the best and the brightest in here and keep them if they have master's and PhD degrees in hard science. And for whatever reason, I know the answer, but politically it seems. But if people who fight this and yet are huge environmentalists think about it at all, they're going to realize that we need the best and brightest talent as a national policy. And we're not always doing that, because we are training some of these people and then they go off to India and they go off to China. If we want to make alternative energy efficiency a huge thing like we did with software in the United States a number of years ago, it takes a concerted effort, and it starts with talent. So big time support for R&D and getting the best and brightest no matter where they are and keeping them is huge, in my opinion, to solving this problem. The difference between my industry and what's going on in alternatives and energy efficiency is that while we both have certainly had help from the government in the early stages, NASA work done in some of these labs, helped the industry that I'm in. But we didn't really have a lot of subsidies. Basically, the industry grew over time because we got our costs down, and that ushered in new applications that people could do cheaper than labor, or different ways to get information that they couldn't do before. And so it was driven by an economic value to a customer to use more sophisticated technology. This is different in that so far, we're competing in the alternative case. We're competing with low-cost oil and gas, and so it has been difficult without some subsidies and help to get these industries started and going. And so, while I recognize that, and I think that the government has to play some role here and help, I worry that the government is not the most objective thing, and because of the politics, not the scientists in the government, it's the politicians, unfortunately. And so I'll give you, I guess I'll give you an example, but first I would say there are a lot of different debates about the amount of subsidies, about cap and trade and all that. The one thing that I think you can consistently see, no matter what anybody's political persuasion is that most everybody, there's universal agreement that the one thing we need to do is double down on R&D. You know, whether it's Bjorn Lomborg and Coolett, whether it's George Shultz, who's now taken a big interest in energy, whether it's Obama, you know, doesn't matter. Everybody, I think, does understand that this is a very small number to pay to help really advance the state of the art and so forth. Some of these other things are more or more debatable, and I'm sure we'll never totally get agreement. But what I would say to politicians, and I try when I meet them, is I hope we can get at least a more objective, science-based decision-making, because we don't have unlimited money. We can't throw money at every problem, and we're going to have trial and error, and we're going to have things that don't work, and that's fine. They're trying lots of things. But when I look at something like corn ethanol, that's been around for 30 years, and I haven't met any scientist who will tell me it makes any difference. It does nothing to improve energy. It takes as much energy to produce it as it generates. It's an enormous wealth transfer to the Corn Belt farmers, and that's basically it. And it pollutes these huge algae booms in the Gulf. It creates higher prices for corn. So this is an example of what I think is running at $15 billion a year, probably more than we spend on all these government agencies. $15 billion a year. So all I ask is, you know, and I ask every congressman I meet is, and I know it's difficult, the politics are difficult, but can't we be more fact-based and honest? And we have a deficit we're trying to fix. That's one thing. But let's actually reinvest some of that money. Let's put some more of that money in hard research, in these labs, in these universities, because that will accelerate discovery. That will accelerate getting to a zero subsidy thing, as was said by one of the speakers yesterday. So, you know, I think one more thing I would say, just to be provocative, living here in California, is that I think California deserves a lot of credit over the years for sort of taking positions on, I remember years ago, catalytic converters. We've done a lot of things to be a leader in environmental issues, which is great to a degree. But I do worry that California isn't big enough to rule the world, isn't big enough to set itself up with so many high-cost things that it can't compete with other states, let alone other countries. And so this notion of arbitrarily saying we're going to have X% in alternatives by 2020 or something, it's interesting, but I don't know how competitive it is with the other states. I mean, it's saying that we're going to create all these new jobs in California. Well, if you looked at SunPower, who I think is based in Northern California, I'd love to see how many jobs in SunPower are in California, how many are in Malaysia and these other places. So I think we have to be careful in the government again. They have to be more objective. It's great, but the difficulty is just sorting out some of this. So there's no question there needs to be focus. There needs to be some degree of subsidization, but hopefully there'll be a bit more objectivity so we can get to the goal line with the right solutions over time. So let me just finish with just talking a little bit about UCSB and sort of repeating what's been told. But we're not solving all the problems, but we really do, because of our material and physical science heritage here, can play and are playing a major role in solving some of the problems. And I think that, you know, the more I look at what we're doing, the more I reflect on my own experience and learning curves, I'm absolutely excited and convinced that we really are gonna see this. You saw yesterday a few of these short presentations about some of the things we're doing in lighting and batteries and computing, and you know, I'm really quite confident that you're going to continue to see enormous progress. And I quote John Bowers from yesterday again: it's the laws of physics pose no fundamental constraints. We're limited by our ingenuity and dedication and passion to succeed. And then I'd also remind you of that famous quote, Rome wasn't built in a day. And again, I'll remind you, Silicon Valley wasn't built in a day. It started maybe 50 years ago. I joined it about 40 years ago. And every year it got better, it got more pervasive, but it wasn't built in a day. And so that's what we're into. We're into a long slog. Every speaker will tell you that. But it turns out 30, 40 years passes pretty quickly if you do all the right things. So, and we don't have to wait to get results. We'll get results. I mean, LEDs are going to make a big impact soon. We'll get results along the way. But I think in 30, 40 years, you'll just have no idea. You'll just be, you'll turn around and say, I had no idea this was all going to happen. It's just, it's here, and it's happening, and it will happen. And I would say 30, 40 years from now, it's possible that people will stand around the table and say, what energy problem? Then we may still have oil and gas, and but it'll be so clear where we're going, where the economics are now, and where things are going, that people will really not be worried about. They still might be worried about healthcare costs. They still may be worried about educating their kids. But I really think this is a quite solvable problem, again, over a number of decades with the right focus and putting the money and incentives in the right place. So I'm quite hopeful. Quite hopeful, and I hope that you are too. And it's going to be fun to see all the great progress that's done here at the university, as well as all the other companies. And that point about talent, we spin off a lot of talent. It doesn't stay here in the university. Most of it's going to go in these companies that are going to make all these breakthroughs and commercialize these things. So it's going to be fun to see all these startups and see like what happened in Silicon Valley. There'll be a mini Silicon Valley in alternatives and energy efficiency ideas. We see some of it today. It'll be a lot more. And I'm very encouraged when you look at all the people playing and the venture capital that's coming in here, because venture capitalists aren't stupid. They can see this is an enormous opportunity, and they want to play. So that's great. So we're still in the early stages, but the best is by far yet to come. So thank you.